Imagine this. You hear whispers, about a huge shakeup in an industry that's just booming. But all the details, they're kind of murky. Well, today, we're cutting through that noise for you. This deep dive is all about India's new online gaming bill. Our mission, really, is to unpack what this legislation is all about. What's the real intent? How did we get here? And what's the seismic impact on this multi-billion-dollar sector going to be?
Absolutely. And we've gathered quite a few sources to help us do that. We're looking at breaking news from places like the Economic Times, more in-depth analysis from the Hindustan Times.
Okay.
Then there are clarifying reports, which are crucial, from the Times of India and Jagran Josh. And we also have those initial alarms raised by the industry reported in Mathrubhumi.
Right, the early reactions.
Exactly. So we'll take you through the whole journey from that initial confusion to the later clarifications and right up to the bill actually hitting Parliament.
Okay, so to really get why this is such a big deal, maybe we should step back for a second. What did the online gaming scene in India look like before this bill? What was the problem they were trying to fix?
Yeah, that's key. Before this, India's online gaming world was, well, fragmented. Think of it like a patchwork of different regulations.
Why was that?
Because gaming, traditionally in India, is a state subject. Each state could have its own rules, or often no specific rules for online gaming.
Ah, okay.
And this created, frankly, an unregulated space causing harm. Concerns were growing about things like fraud, addiction, So there's this feeling that a single national law was needed. Badly needed, actually.
Right, to bring some order. So given that fragmented, maybe slightly Wild West situation, what happened when the first draft of this bill dropped? What was the industry's gut reaction? Were they completely blindsided?
Oh, blindsided might be putting it mildly. Mathrubhumi reported on the immediate, panic is the word they use. Real alarm spread through the industry.
Panic over what specifically?
The absolute core fear was that the draft, as they read it initially, might categorize all real money games under the umbrella of gambling or games of chance.
Which would mean?
Potentially making them all illegal. Just like that. You can imagine the chilling effect that had.
Yeah, absolutely. So if that worst case scenario happened, what kind of economic damage were people talking about?
The forecasts were genuinely catastrophic. You had industry groups like the All India Gaming Federation, the AIGF, and the E-Gaming Federation, the EGF, putting out numbers.
And what were they saying?
They were projecting a loss of, get this, $2.5 billion in annual revenue.
Wow. Billion,
yeah. And that wasn't all. It put investments worth $4 billion already made into the Indian gaming scene at risk.
Huge amounts.
And maybe even more importantly, it threatened the jobs, the livelihoods of over 50,000 direct employees, plus all the indirect jobs linked to them. So it wasn't just about the company's bottom lines. It was about a whole ecosystem.
But hang on, it wasn't like the industry was saying no rules ever, was it? Didn't they actually want a national law?
Exactly right. Their position wasn't anti-regulation. They welcomed the idea of a uniform framework.
So what was the sticking point?
The sticking point was how it was regulated. They desperately wanted a framework that clearly differentiates between games of skill and games of chance.
Okay, the skill versus chance distinction.
Precisely. They pointed to existing Indian law, where the Supreme Court and various high courts had already repeatedly ruled that games of skill are a legal business activity, separate from gambling.
So they felt the draft ignored that precedent.
That was the fear. It really shows how one definition, one legal interpretation, can literally be existential for an entire segment of an industry, doesn't it? It's a tension we see in digital regulation everywhere.
Definitely. Which then leads us to sort of the next chapter. Reports started coming out later from the Times of India, Jagran Josh. How did the story change then? Was that initial panic just, wrong?
Not entirely wrong. No, the concerns were real. But those later reports brought a more nuanced understanding. They started clarifying the bill's actual intent.
Which was?
Which was not to ban all real money games, but rather to create a regulatory filter. It wasn't a sledgehammer. It was meant to be more like a sieve.
Okay, that's a really important difference. A filter, not a ban. So if that was the case, what were the government's official goals for bringing this bill forward?
The government laid out three main objectives. First, pretty straightforward, to establish a uniform national level regulation. Get rid of that confusing patchwork.
Makes sense.
Second, and this is the big one, to clearly distinguish between permissible games of skill and illegal games of chance, which is essentially gambling.
Right, codifying that difference.
And third, to protect citizens from the risks of fraud and addiction that can come with, totally unregulated platforms. It's that classic balancing act, trying to encourage an industry while keeping people safe.
Okay, so with that distinction being central, how did the bill actually structure things? How does it lay out what's okay and what's definitely not? What are these categories?
Right, it sets up clear categories. First, you have the permitted category. Inside that, a big winner is esports.
Ah, competitive gaming.
Exactly. It's officially defined now as a structured competition through video games. And importantly, it's recognized as a legitimate sport of skill.
That's quite significant for them, I imagine.
It's huge. A really significant win, giving that whole industry clear legal standing.
Okay, so esports are in. What else is permitted? You mentioned POGs.
Yes, POGs, permitted online games. These are basically games that have to meet specific criteria to be defined as games of skill.
Like what kinds of games?
Well, the sources suggest things like certain fantasy sports and card games could be POGs. But here's the catch. They have to pass the regulatory test. It's not automatic.
Got it. And the banned category.
That's very clear-cut. Online gambling and betting. Any game that's ultimately deemed to be a game of chance or involves betting on, some uncertain outcome that's strictly prohibited, this is where that skill versus chance line becomes the absolute gatekeeper.
Okay, so you've got the categories, but how do you actually enforce all this? What's the mechanism? The bill must set up some kind of regulatory system, right?
It does, yeah. A pretty comprehensive one. First, there'll be a new dedicated central government agency specifically to oversee the online gaming sector.
A new government body.
Yes, but here's a really interesting part. The bill also authorizes something called self-regulatory organizations, or SROs.
Self-regulatory, so run by the industry itself.
Essentially, yes. Industry-led SROs.
Yeah.
And they get a crucial job. They'll be empowered to certify which games qualify as permitted online games based on the criteria the government sets out.
Wow, so the industry gets to police itself to some extent?
That seems to be the model. They'll be the ones applying the skill test game by game. It's an approach that can be efficient, drawing on industry expertise, but it always raises questions about potential conflicts of interest. The government seems to think it's the way forward here, though.
Interesting dynamic. Okay, so what happens if a platform just ignores all this, tries to operate an illegal game anyway? What are the teeth in this law?
Oh, there are definitely teeth. The bill lays out strict penalties, really severe consequences.
Like fines.
Big ones. Monetary penalties running into crores of rupees. For context, a crore is 10 million rupees, so we're talking potentially millions, even tens of millions of dollars in fines.
Okay, that's serious money.
Absolutely. And it's not just fines. There's also the possibility of imprisonment for individuals involved, maybe up to 3 years. So yeah, this is legislation with real weight behind it.
Right, it's not just financial penalties. Beyond the stick, though, what about protecting the players themselves? Is there anything focused on consumer safety?
Yes, definitely. A big part of the framework is about consumer protection. Things like mandatory KYC verification, know your customer.
To make sure players are who they say they are.
Exactly. Helps prevent fraud, underage gaming, things like that. The bill also mandates transparent terms and conditions and fair play. Plus, clear mechanisms for grievance redressal if players have problems.
And what about responsible gaming? Addiction is a big concern.
A very big focus. The framework pushes for responsible gaming features. Think spending limits players can set, time reminders popping up, tools to help people manage their play, and hopefully foster a healthier gaming environment overall.
Okay, so it's a pretty comprehensive package defining games, setting up regulators, penalties, player protection. With all these changes coming, what does this actually mean for the industry on the ground? Who wins and who, well, loses?
Well, the stakes are just huge, as we said. The Hindustan Times pegged the industry at about $3.7 billion. So this is a truly pivotal moment.
And that POG certification is key.
That requirement for games gets certified as a permitted online game by those SROs. That's probably the single most important factor that will determine survival for companies. It's the gateway.
Okay, so if that's the gateway, who's likely to get through it easily? Who are the probable winners here?
You'd probably look at the large, well-funded companies. Think names like Dream 11, Games 24/7. They're generally better positioned to navigate the regulatory process.
They have the resources, the lawyers.
Exactly. They can handle the compliance costs, adapt their games if needed. And of course, the esports platforms we mentioned, they're clear beneficiaries too, thanks to that formal recognition as skill-based.
Makes sense. And on the other side of the coin, who might struggle? Who are the potential losers?
Smaller startups and operators are definitely facing a tougher climb. They might just lack the resources, the money, the expertise to meet all the compliance requirements.
So they might have to.
They might be forced to shut down or be acquired by the bigger players. Consolidation seems likely.
And what about those games in the middle, the ones where the skill versus chance thing is debatable?
Yes. There's significant anxiety for companies in gray areas. Think poker, maybe other card games where that debate is really intense.
Their fate really hangs in the balance then.
Absolutely. It depends entirely on how those SROs interpret the rules and apply that skill test. It's a nervous time for them, for sure.
And flipping it around to the user, to you listening, how is this going to change your experience when you want to play an online game in India?
You'll likely notice a few things. Definitely stricter KYC processes before you can play on many platforms. More identity checks.
Okay.
You might also see a more curated marketplace. Fewer games overall, maybe, because only the certified POGs will be readily available.
So potentially less choice, but maybe safer options.
That's the idea. And you'll almost certainly see more prominent, responsible gaming features. Those limits, the reminders we talked about, they'll be much more visible, much more integrated into the experience.
Right. Okay, so that's the impact. Now let's track the bill itself. Where is it in the actual lawmaking process? What's the latest?
Okay, this is where the Economic Times reporting comes in. The latest big step is that the Gaming Bill 2024 has been formally tabled, basically presented in the Lok Sabha.
Which is the lower house of India's parliament.
Correct. And that's a really significant moment. It marks the major transition from proposal to formal legislation. It's officially in the parliamentary system now.
So it's been introduced. What happens next? Does it just become law?
Oh no, there's a process. Now it faces debate and scrutiny from the members of parliament, the MPs.
They can argue about it, suggest changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a potential for amendments based on those debates. Then, for it to become law, it needs to be passed by a majority in both houses of parliament, the Lok Sabha and then the Rajya Sabha, the upper house.
And after that?
After clearing both houses, it goes for the president's assent, the final step to becoming official law. It's designed to be a thorough process.
Okay. So looking at the whole picture, from the initial panic to the parliamentary debate, what's the single biggest challenge, the one thing that will really decide if this whole regulatory effort works as intended?
I think it still comes down to that core issue. The devil will be in the details. Specifically, the details of the specific criteria used to define a game of skill versus a game of chance.
Everything hinges on that definition.
Pretty much. The ultimate success of this whole thing rests on the effectiveness and transparency of the regulatory bodies, both the government one and the SROs, and the definitions they use. That's where the rubber meets the road, especially for all those games currently sitting in that gray area.
So to wrap things up, in this deep dive, we've really gone from that initial industry shock and fear through the government's stated aims, the nuts and bolts of the new rules, and what it all means for companies and players. It's clear, isn't it? This isn't really the end of the game for online gaming in India.
Not at all.
It feels more like the start of an entirely new, more regulated, and potentially less crowded one.
That sums it up perfectly. A massive transformation is underway.
Which leaves us and you with maybe one final thought to ponder. India's trying this ambitious balancing act, right? Nurturing a booming digital economy while protecting its citizens. So how might the way these new regulators ultimately interpret skill versus chance, that crucial line, how might that not only shape gaming in India, but maybe even offer lessons or perhaps a model for other countries facing very similar challenges in this digital age? Something to think about as this whole story continues to play out.